The complete history of how the church got divided. The Christian faith kicked off with just a handful of followers in a dusty corner of the Roman Empire. For a while, it saw itself as a single, unified body, a fellowship of believers united by a common story and mission. So how did that become this? A sprawling, complex family tree of thousands of distinct denominations, often at odds with one another. How did one of the world's great religions, founded on a message of love and unity, shatter into so many pieces? This is the story of the epic schisms and messy reformations that tore the church apart and, in doing so, created the world we live in today. It's a story of faith and power, of politics and personalities, a story of how a single body was fractured, again and again, by the very people who claimed to be its protectors. The first great split. Long before the famous division between East and West, the Church faced a massive identity crisis that led to its first permanent schism. The year was 451 AD, and the question at the Council of Chalcedon was a mind-bendingly difficult one. What is the exact nature of Jesus Christ? The council came to a conclusion that would become dogma for most of Christianity, that Christ was one person, with two distinct natures, one divine and one human. But many churches, especially in Egypt and Syria, couldn't accept this. To them, this formula sounded like it dangerously divided Jesus. Their refusal to accept the council's ruling led to a massive split. This created the family of churches we now know as the Oriental Orthodox, which remain distinct from both the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches to this day. So, hundreds of years before the split everyone talks about, the church had already broken in two. The East versus West showdown, the Great Schism. For the next several centuries, the church that remained was a vast and diverse entity, stretching from Ethiopia to England. But beneath the surface, deep cracks were forming. The Roman Empire itself had already split, creating two different worlds. In the West, they spoke Latin and looked to Rome as their center of gravity. In the East, they spoke Greek, and their capital was the magnificent city of Constantinople, the New Rome. This political and language divide caused the two halves of the church to drift apart. They developed different customs, different prayers, and different ways of thinking. In the West, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, began to assert universal authority over the whole church, based on his succession from the Apostle Peter. The Eastern leaders, however, saw the Pope as a first among equals, not an absolute monarch. Tensions simmered for centuries, but the final breaking point came down to a single word: Filioque.
Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't, as an encouragement for more of this kind of content.
The original Nicene Creed, a core statement of faith, said that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Western churches, however, started adding "and the Son" Filioque in Latin. To the East, this was an illegal edit to a sacred text and a theological error. Other fights broke out over things as seemingly small as whether priests should have beards or what kind of bread to use for communion. The final, dramatic break happened in 1054. Pope Leo IX sent a hot-headed delegation led by Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople. The talks with Patriarch Michael Cerularius were a complete disaster. On the 16th of July, 1054, Cardinal Humbert marched into the stunning Hagia Sophia Cathedral and slammed a bull of excommunication down on the high altar, condemning the Patriarch and all his followers. The Patriarch promptly responded by excommunicating Humbert. The Great Schism had officially begun. The one church was now two: the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East. Any real hope of reconciliation was torched about 150 years later, when Western Knights of the Fourth Crusade, who were supposed to be fighting in the Holy Land, got sidetracked and brutally sacked the Christian city of Constantinople. For the East, This was the ultimate betrayal, sealing a division that lasts to this day. The shattering, the Protestant Reformation. For the next 500 years, the Roman Catholic Church was the undisputed heavyweight of Western Europe. The Pope was arguably the most powerful man on the continent, but with great power came great corruption. The Church was criticized for its immense wealth, its political games, and a practice that would light the fuse of the next explosion: the sale of indulgences.
The sale of indulgences. Now, indulgences were complicated. Officially, they were meant to reduce the temporal punishment one had to undergo for sins, not a get-out-of-hell-free card. But on the ground, to many everyday people, it looked an awful lot like the Church was selling salvation for cash. In the German town of Wittenberg, a monk and professor named Martin Luther was deeply troubled by this. He was convinced salvation couldn't be bought. It was a free gift from God, received through faith alone. On October 31, 1517, Luther made his move. He posted a list of 95 theses, points for debate, on the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, directly challenging the sale of indulgences and the Pope's authority to sell them. Luther didn't want to start a new church. He wanted to start a conversation, to reform the one he loved. But his ideas, supercharged by the revolutionary new technology of the printing press, went viral across Europe. The Pope demanded Luther recant. He refused. In 1521, he was excommunicated. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Luther's core ideas, that the Bible alone was the source of authority, sola scriptura, and salvation was by faith alone, sola fide, resonated with millions. He translated the Bible into German, and while it wasn't the very first translation into a common language, it was the one that blew the doors open, letting ordinary people read the scriptures for themselves on a massive scale. And it wasn't just Luther. In Switzerland, Huldred Zwingli pushed for similar reforms. In Geneva, John Calvin created a new, highly organized branch of Protestantism. The Reformation wasn't one split, it was a shattering into dozens of new groups: Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists, and more. In England, the change was more political. King Henry VIII, desperate for a male heir and furious that the Pope wouldn't annul his marriage, simply broke with Rome, declared himself head of the Church of England, and granted his own divorce. The result of all this was over a century of brutal religious wars, as Catholics and newly minted Protestants battled for control. The splintering continues. The Protestant Reformation wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was a new beginning for division. The very principle that Luther had championed, that individuals could read and interpret the Bible for themselves, was a natural recipe for more splits. After all, if there's no pope to give the final word, whose interpretation is the right one? So, Protestantism itself began to splinter. The Anabaptists broke away, insisting that only adults should be baptized. In England, John Wesley's revival movement eventually led to Methodism. In America, new movements like the Baptists and Pentecostals emerged, each with its own unique focus. This process has only accelerated in recent centuries, giving rise to countless non-denominational churches that answer to no central authority at all. So, what's the takeaway from all this? From that single movement in ancient Judea, Christianity has fractured into a kaleidoscope of faiths. The story of how the church got divided is a story of very human failings, of pride, politics, and a thirst for power. It's a story of how cultural and language differences can slowly carve canyons between people. But it's also a story of incredible conviction, of people like Martin Luther who were willing to risk everything for what they believed to be true. These divisions didn't just change a religion. Many argue they helped forge the modern world. The shattering of a unified Christendom helped pave the way for new ideas about the secular state, individual freedoms, and the very notion of religious choice. The world we live in today was forged in the fires of these schisms. The broken body of the church, in its very fracturing, reshaped the globe, leaving a legacy of both bitter conflict and fierce independent faith that continues to define our time. If you want to explore more deep dives into the historical forces that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.